Okay, let's try this again. I don't know why this is so hard for me to get done, but here I am, nearly 3 years later, finally telling the full details of what exactly happened after my son was born that led to his brain damage. I'm aware that most of you coming across this video probably have no idea who I am or what my story is or what my son's story is. So hi, my name is Tunisia and I'm a mother of 3 boys. My oldest son, he's almost 7. My middle son, he's 4. And my youngest son is almost 3 years old. His birthday is actually tomorrow from the day I'm recording this. And this is who the story is about. His name is Harley. And shortly after he was born, he experienced brain damage due to the negligence of a midwife because of his jaundice that basically wasn't treated properly in a timely manner. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go over like what jaundice is, how it could cause brain damage, what are the risk factors of it, and basically like the aftermath of the brain damage and what my son experiences. For those of you who don't know me and haven't been following my story, just to kind of like catch you guys up. I really didn't even start sharing any of his story until he was a year old, that I made this post and kind of just put all the details of, again, like his diagnosis and stuff into that post. And that was my first time like really coming out and saying that like he has brain damage and cerebral palsy. And so for those of you who don't know, jaundice that occurs within the first 24 hours to 48 hours after birth is considered a medical emergency and needs to be treated immediately, or else it could cause brain damage. People are very familiar with the term jaundice because it is very common and it happens within 60% of babies, but it typically occurs around the 3rd day of life, and that's typically normal. There's 2 different types of jaundice. There's the physiological jaundice that typically occurs around the 3rd day, and then there's pathological jaundice, which is more dangerous and typically occurs within a few hours up to like 24 to 48 hours after birth. Anytime a baby is yellow and jaundiced within the first day or 2 after birth, it is considered a medical emergency and needs to be treated immediately. But that did not happen with my son, and it ended up damaging his brain, and now he has severe cerebral palsy, developmental delays, and all of that stuff. So yeah, there's a few risk factors when it comes to pathological jaundice, which is ABO incompatibility. That's what I experienced with my son, and that's pretty much where my blood type is different than his blood type, and so it's like incompatible to where like their body has a hard time fighting off something within my blood when they're born. I forget the exact terms, but it's an incompatibility of the blood types, right? The second risk factor that I'm aware of is the RH factor. Typically, mothers get tested for that during pregnancy, and depending on whether it's positive or negative or not, you know that if you need to look out for that. And the third genetic is called GP6D. I'm not really too familiar with that, but I do know that it is something that is a risk factor for babies having pathological jaundice, which again typically occurs when a baby is yellow within hours up to 24 to 48 hours after birth. Other symptoms that a baby may be experiencing pathological jaundice and might need medical attention is a lethargic baby, or a baby that's not like eating well or eating properly. But literally anytime a baby is yellow within a few hours to a day after birth or whatever, I'm just gonna say up to 24 hours after birth, but you can notice it up to a few hours, because the way like jaundice levels work, the bilirubin levels is pretty much kind of like a chart. So like if the bilirubin level for a baby that's 4 hours old is like at a level 10, that's way worse than a baby who's 3 days old and at a level 10. So depending on like how old they are, how many hours they are, and where their bilirubin level is at, tells like how bad it is basically. So that's what jaundice is. I know a lot of you did not know that it could cause brain damage. I didn't know that it could cause brain damage. And let me just put this disclaimer in and say that I might speak with like a lot of conviction now and like a lot of education now, but I did not know all of this stuff when I was going through what I was going through with my son. I was just another mom giving birth, you know, feeling like I was under trusted care. And yeah, I had no idea about any of this. So all of the stuff that I'm telling you guys is everything that I've learned through my experience. So brain damage can occur in many different ways. Like, for instance, if a baby was to lack oxygen during the birth process, they would have a specific type of brain damage. And the type of brain damage that my son has is called kernicterus. That is when you specifically get brain damage from hyperbilirubinemia, which is elevated bilirubin levels, which is jaundice. It all means the same stuff. With that, it typically damages the basal ganglia part of the brain. And the basal ganglia is in charge of telling your body how to move. Like, every type of movement you coordinate with your body comes from the basal ganglia. So because that was the specific part of his brain that was damaged, it was very evident to the neurologist that he was going to have cerebral palsy, which is basically cerebral has to do with the brain and palsy has to do with weakened movement. That's the specific type of brain damage that he has, is kernicterus. And with kernicterus came a whole load of other diagnoses. So not only does he have cerebral palsy, but he also has dystonia, hypertonia, truncal hypotonia, auditory neuropathy. When he was younger, his eye maturation was slow. His growth as far as like nutrition was very slow. And basically what dystonia is pretty much, it's kind of similar to Parkinson's disease, but it's basically like, the way it was described to me is like, for instance, when we want to like reach out for something, we could just like directly reach out and grab whatever it is. Whereas with dystonia, it comes with like these wriggly movements that like pull your arm in all these different directions to get to what you actually want. So whereas we could just reach out, my son's movement looks a little bit like this because his arm is like constantly pulling back in when he actually wants to like reach out. So that's dystonia. And then he has hypertonia, which is like the stiffness of muscles in his limbs. And then he has truncal hypotonia, which is the weakness of muscles in his truncal area, which is like his neck, spine, that part. So he has all types of like, it was very evident like with the cerebral palsy that he was going to have problems with his movement and muscles and stuff like that. But on top of that, he has the dystonia, the hypertonia, and the hypotonia, which just all plays a part in his movement. And then he also has audioneuropathy, which is auditory neuropathy, which is a form of hearing loss. It's not necessarily like deaf, as in like you can't hear anything. It's more like the way that the brain processes what's being heard. So it's kind of hard to put speech together. The way it's been described to me is if you were on a Zoom call with like 25 people and everybody had their mute off and you're trying to hear like what one specific person is trying to say, but you can't really hear because like all these other like sounds are going on and noises, and you can't really make sense of what's being heard. That's similar to what auditory neuropathy is like for anybody who has it. And so therefore they have a hard time putting speech together, therefore they have a hard time forming speech, and therefore they become speech delayed. So my son is definitely speech delayed. He's developmentally delayed in like all physical aspects. He can't sit up on his own. He can't crawl, roll over, walk, talk, eat. Like, he really can't do anything physically, but he's very cute, he's very smart, he's very happy, and his receptive communication is very much so up to par. So I'll of course talk more about him and his journey like on times to come, but I'm just gonna stay focused on the story at hand. So that's everything that he experiences with the brain damage. Now we can kind of get into the story. So like I said, I have 3 sons. My oldest son also had this same ABO incompatibility. The difference was I gave birth in the hospital with my oldest son, and my next 2 kids I had at home with a midwife. So when I had my first son, none of it seemed like traumatic, or like, even as a first-time mom, like they had took him to the NICU 4 hours after he was born, but like it did not seem dangerous or traumatic or anything at all. They just really were like, oh, like it's because your guys' blood type is different and we just have to keep his levels down. Like it just was real casual like that. So he went to the NICU, he was under bilirubin lights, like phototherapy, stuff like that. Again, like I don't recall anything like really traumatic or dangerous, or like we have to make sure. I remember the only thing that they did mention was like blood transfusion, and to me that was like the scariest thing. I was like, oh no, like I don't want him to have a blood transfusion, like I hope they keep his level down. But they didn't educate me on like my next babies or like what to look out for or whatever. All I really knew from that experience was it was because of the blood type difference. That's all I really knew. By the time I had my second baby, that's when I met this midwife and hired her for my second baby. And obviously when I hired her, I let her know of like my birth history, and I let her know of like this ABO incompatibility thing. I didn't know much about it. I just know that their blood types might be different than mine. So I was like telling her that and making sure that she would be able to check the baby's blood type after the baby was born. What happens after the blood type is checked, I have no idea. I would hope that like, you know, the provider would know, but I didn't know. I just knew that the blood type needed to be checked to see if it was like the same or different than mine. So with my second baby, that was beautiful, beautiful birth. You could look on my channel and see the birth of him, and all was fine. They checked his blood during the newborn screening and it was the same as mine, so there was like nothing about that. So fast forward a year later, I get pregnant with my third son and I hired the same midwife, and we have formed like a really good relationship outside of my pregnancies. I would say I did like a doula training with her. We just had a really good connection. I trusted her a lot, so of course I hired her again. And at this point, you know my birth history, at this point you know my patient history, so all is the same, right? Like baby's born, I'm gonna want to, I know I have this little ABO incompatibility thing going on, like make sure we check his blood, right? Okay, so now here comes the timeline of what exactly did happen when my son was born. And I'm gonna be like referring to my phone just to refer to like time frames, and so you guys could follow along directly, or if I wanted to read anything verbatim, I'll be looking on my phone. But basically, starting Friday, March 27th, 2020 is when my son was born. So it was Friday morning at like 4:40. Okay, so we're very early Friday morning. So pretty much the morning my son was born, all was well, aside from the fact that they did not do a blood test like how they did with my second son. They did do the newborn screening and all of that was fine, but they did not do the blood test. So that was kind of like the start of the negligence, because that, according to my like patient history and my birth history, like that was something that was important. Had they did the blood test that day, I don't know what even would have happened after that, because clearly they did not know what to do about it, you know. But that was like the first thing, is that they didn't do the blood test that morning. So basically we went to sleep that day, we woke up the next morning, and we just kind of were like spending the day or whatever. But like by the nighttime at 11:39 that night, Friday night still, I texted the midwife a picture, and I'll insert like pictures so you guys could see like what I'm referring to and stuff. But I texted her a picture of Harley, stating that for the third time that day he had spat up clear fluids. But like looking back at the picture, you could clearly see he already had a yellowish tint. I didn't, like, and that's a whole nother thing that I talk about on my Instagram a little bit, is like postpartum fog and like postpartum like altered state of consciousness. And let me just say something else real quick, is I know that none of this was like my fault, and it's nothing that I should have known better about or whatever. Like I was under a care provider's care for a reason, and I should be able to trust in that care provider to like give me proper protocols. But yeah, like I just think it's crazy that looking back, I could see all the stuff. Like I'm like, wow, like I do see the yellow, like or whatever. But in those moments, as a freshly postpartum mom, I really was only thinking about how light skinned my son was, because he was the lightest baby I had given birth to. Like he's like very fair skinned with blonde hair, and like my other 2 children are not like that. So now that I look back at pictures, I'm able to see like the yellow and how much it like worsened, and at one point he almost looked orange and like yellow in his eyes. Like I really was not seeing all of that in the actual moment, but that's neither here nor there, because it's not my fault or like about what I've noticed, what I didn't notice, because the fact of the matter is we all were aware that he was yellow within the first 24 hours, but I wasn't given proper protocol on what to do with him, and that's why he ended up having brain damage. So looking back at the picture, you could definitely see that he had clear skin, but I was like sending her a picture of this like fluid that he kept spitting up, and she said that it was very common within the first few days. That was 19 hours after birth. So mind you, he was born very early Friday, and we ended up kind of like nestling in, sleeping that whole next day or whatever. So that was 19 hours after birth. So now we're going into Saturday, the 28th at 12:10 p.m. One thing that I didn't mention yet is that the midwife whose care I was under works alongside her husband. So her husband's like her assistant, midwife in training, whatever you want to call it. So when you hear me referring to he, that's who I'm talking about. So Saturday, 12:10 p.m. This is 32 hours after birth. The husband had texted me stating that our 24-hour appointment would be later in the night. So clearly we're already past the actual 24-hour mark of this 24-hour appointment. But he's texting me to let me know that it's still going to be held off until later in the night. And he also asked if I could send him photos of Harley, followed by hopefully he is not having any issue with jaundice or other things. Which I replied, I was like, because I kind of thought it was weird that he was asking that. I just don't recall, like with my second son, I don't recall them like following up and being like, oh, like send us pictures, let's see if he's jaundiced. So to me that was kind of like, But when he said it, I was like, actually, I'm starting to get worked up, y'all. So I get very like passionate about this. Obviously it's my son, and it's been very emotional to tell this story, which is why it's taking so long for me to tell this story, but bear with me. So so he says, send me some pictures, hopefully he's not having any issues with jaundice or anything. And I said, actually, he is appearing quite yellow. I was hoping you would be by earlier to see. And then I sent him some pictures of Harley. I kind of like sent the pictures and I said this was taken at this time, this was taken at this time. So I sent him 3 different pictures. One was, it was like, oh, this was yesterday at 7:30 a.m. So one was 3 hours after birth, one was 10 hours after birth. And as he was texting me, I took one in that moment at the 32nd hour to show him like what it had looked like. Let me just say, it's this very instant that they should have told me to take my baby straight to the hospital, because as I mentioned before, jaundice that appears within the first 24 to 48 hours after birth is considered a medical emergency. And you would think that people who give birth to babies all the time and have 24-hour checkups should know what to look for, what risk factors, what, you know, they say, oh, if your baby's running a fever within the first 24 hours, let us know. If your baby's yellow within the first 24 hours, that should be something that anybody who is dealing with babies and giving birth to babies should know. So I sent the pictures and showing that he was jaundiced. And instead of them telling me to take him to the hospital, they said that they'll check his blood when they come later in the evening for our 24-hour checkup. That wasn't until almost 48 hours after birth. And they also said put him under sunlight in the meantime, which let me just tell you guys now, putting a baby in indirect sunlight is not a blanket treatment for all jaundice babies. Like I was mentioning before, there's two different types of jaundice. There's the physiological type of jaundice and the pathological type of jaundice. And maybe physiological jaundice, you can place them in sunlight because it's not as damaging, I would say. But with a baby that's experiencing pathological jaundice, it's very important to know, how I mentioned those bilirubin levels, it's very important to know where those bilirubin levels are at however many hours old the baby is, and determine what type of treatment the baby needs, whether it's a bilirubin blanket, triple phototherapy, blood transfusion. Like, you have to know the bilirubin levels to determine what to do with a jaundice baby. But I was told to just put him in indirect sunlight 3 times a day, and that they'll see me later that night. So yeah, as I mentioned, they didn't arrive to my 24-hour checkup until almost 48 hours later. They came Saturday night at 11 p.m. And basically, like, as our meeting got started, they straight up was like, we forgot the blood test in our other car. And I'm like, okay, like, so what do we do? I don't know what to do, but I think I have to do something. Like, what do we do? So pretty much that whole meeting was spent us like just discussing different options and stuff. They were asking me like what they did in the hospital with my first son, and I was just like naming off, like, they had the bilirubin lights, bilirubin blanket. Not that I know what specific treatment needs to be done based off of whatever bilirubin level. I'm just going based off of my experience. I'm not the medical professional here. So we were talking about that. They were looking into places to maybe rent a bilirubin blanket. Something else I didn't state is that all of this was like 1 week into, you know, what happened 2 years ago. So all of this was like fresh into that. Like, the whole world shut down, like everything just shut down out of nowhere, which was like scary times, right? But we were like looking into places that maybe we could rent bilirubin blankets from. They were asking my partner, because my partner was just like sharing how he used to deliver bilirubin blankets to babies, and they were like, oh, maybe you could like hit up one of your old coworkers, because he didn't work there no more. They're like, maybe you could hit up one of your old coworkers. And I don't know if it was their idea or his idea to hit up one of the old coworkers and see about renting a bilirubin blanket. But I do know that once that conversation came up, they were like, that would be like a good side hustle. Like, imagine us having like bilirubin blankets and being able to rent them out and blah, 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 blah. That's pretty much what the meeting was like. Also, let me state, I wanted to insert a picture as well, because I wanted to show what my son looked like right before they had came to this meeting. He was literally wrapped up in this same swaddle. This picture was taken, like, I'll have to look at the timestamp, but it was taken shortly before. Looking back in this picture, you could very much see that he damn near looks orange. And it's crazy to me because, again, I did not notice this. Like, this is the picture that I posted as his announcement, thinking that, like, oh, he was finally opening his eyes and, like, looking cute. Like, I did not notice how unwell he looked. And for a midwife to come shortly after, she sure did not have nothing to say about how unwell he looked, how his color looked, about anything. So, oh, another thing that I wanted to mention about this specific meeting is that she did randomly throw in this comment, which I think is very interesting. Mind you, I told you guys that, like, we were pretty close outside of my pregnancies and stuff, and that I had a really, like, good connection with her and trusted her a lot or whatever. And so at one point, again, there wasn't no urgency about, like, my child's under a medical emergency, like, we need to act on this fast. Like, nothing of that felt like that. And to top it all off, this is what she told me. She said, I'm gonna just throw this in. As a professional, I guess I should, like, tell you to take him to the hospital. But as a friend, I'm just going to say keep him home. But my point in saying that is that there was no like definite urge of like, you need to get this baby help. Like, it's an emergency. Like, there was no urgency at all in this meeting. Like, it was very just casual, like, what do we do? Like, as if we just had all the time in the world. And so, like I said, they left the meeting with no definite action step. I just did not feel right about that. So shortly after they left, I told you the meeting was at like 11 p.m. So now we're into Sunday, early Sunday morning. It's like shortly after midnight. I text the midwife at 12:32 a.m. about 30 minutes after they left. That 24-hour checkup at the 48th hour mark. And I said, I'm thinking about renting a bilirubin blanket from the place you mentioned. And I also asked her who's the person she mentioned that lived, whatever. I was asking about the naturopath doctor, and she replied, and you could tell in her reply, it was just like very, I don't know, to me it was like very dismissive. She was like, the place for blankets is in Colorado. I live in California, right? And she was like, and she mentioned this other city has nothing to do with the bilirubin blanket. That was a naturopath, but I'll send the link. And I'm like, they deliver in California too. I will call and get more information tomorrow, because clearly she wasn't paying attention during, like, that was a whole conversation during our meeting. Her husband was talking about the place, and he's like, oh yeah, they're based in Colorado. Oh, but they do deliver in California. Like, duh, that's why that was even an option. So I don't even know why she gave me that backhand comment of like, the place is in Colorado. Like, clearly you weren't paying attention to the situation at hand. So whatever. And I was like, yeah, I was thinking of the naturopath, like talking to the naturopath and seeing if they would be able to check his levels. And she basically was like, I could see if I could send you to the lab to have his levels checked. Not sure if they do babies, blah, 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 whatever. So like I said, that was Sunday shortly after midnight. Now we're into Sunday morning. At about 8 a.m., as soon as the bilirubin blanket place opened, I got in contact with them to start the process of renting a bilirubin blanket. And they were asking for a prescription request from my provider. And so I let the husband know, because he does all like the business side of things. And he sent me one over. Now, let me just say, in that moment, clearly, I'm thinking I'm doing what I need to do to help my baby. Like, I don't really know what I need to do, but bilirubin blanket is an option at home during the whole world shutdown. Like, that's the least I could do, right? But y'all, knowing what I know now, it is crazy to me that this man put in a prescription request for a bilirubin blanket without knowing the baby's bilirubin levels. That's like prescribing somebody medication without knowing the proper dose to give them, and asking them like, oh, well, what did your brother get? Oh, he got 25 milligrams. Okay, I'll give him 25 milligrams too, or like whatever. You know, like, it's crazy. I don't know why. I mean, obviously now I know that they knew nothing about the mechanisms of jaundice and all of this stuff, but that is crazy that you would prescribe a bilirubin blanket without knowing this baby's bilirubin levels. Had you knew the bilirubin levels, or sent me to somebody who does, right? If everything's deviate out of your care, you refer out. If you don't know what the fuck you doing, refer out to somebody who does. So somebody could have ran my baby's bilirubin levels and told me I need a bilirubin blanket, or told me I need triple phototherapy, or told me I need a blood transfusion, or whatever, based off of his levels. It's crazy. Like, in the moment I thought I was truly helping my baby, but it's crazy that's crazy. So he blindly requests this bilirubin blanket. I'm thinking all is well, I'm helping my baby. He started pooping more once the bilirubin blanket arrived. It came like 3 hours later at like 11 o'clock that morning. And like I said, he started pooping, which then my mind started thinking back to my first son. And I'm like, oh yeah, they did say like poop helps eliminate the bilirubin. Like, so I thought all was going well. Like, he was pooping all day that day, right? As I mentioned earlier, like sleepiness, lethargic, and like not eating properly is another sign that something's not right, you know, especially with a jaundice baby. And that's what I was experiencing with him as well. Back then, I did not correlate his sleepiness to being lethargic. Like, I honestly was just like, oh, like, just went through labor and birth, like, so sleepy. But now I know that that was actually him being lethargic, and he was like not really eating that much, and I had started to syringe feed him as well. So I think it was that Sunday, like I said, the bilirubin blanket had came. I started to like notice that he wasn't really eating properly, and syringe feed him. He was pooping more, but like, I don't know, but he was still sleeping a lot. And so basically by the end of that evening, just things didn't start to feel right. I think at this point my mother intuition had kicked in, like something in my mama gut just like was not feeling right. Nothing had actually changed with my baby's physical behavior, but something was just weird. I want to say like maybe 5, 6 o'clock or something. I had called the nurse helpline, and I was asking them, like telling them the story or whatever, and like, what should I do? Like, again, the whole world shut down, so I'm like, what do I do? Like, do I take him in? Like, whatever. And even them, they had like a hard time figuring out what to do. Like, the guy had me on hold for like not an hour, but back and forth for like an hour. Then he was like, I'll call you back after the doctor contacts me back. And he ended up calling back, and he basically was just like, the doctor just said, if you do take him in, to do so like within the next few hours, and to make sure you take him to this specific hospital, like the children's hospital, instead of another one that was nearby. And so I hung up, and I called the midwife crying, and I'm like, I'm about to take him to the emergency room, like something just doesn't feel right. And y'all know, she pretty much like talked me out of taking him to the emergency room. She was like telling me something like, oh, I was like looking into the like jaundice, and basically like it peaks and then it drops down. It's like the peak of a mountain, and then it'll go down, and like blah 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 blah. She was like, I will just wait it out and see how he does tomorrow. That's what she told me. She said, I will just wait it out and see how he does tomorrow. And I just still wasn't really like, So I asked again for a second time. I'm like, can you connect me to that naturopath? I'm just hearing doctor, like naturopath, doctor. I don't know, like clearly a lot of people aren't even educated in this jaundice, bilirubin stuff, but I just heard doctor, and clearly I'm looking for a second opinion at this point. I didn't call the nurse helpline. I'm calling you. You're telling me to wait it out till tomorrow. Can I at least speak to the doctor that you were talking about, the naturopath doctor? So she connects me to this doctor. So yeah, she puts us in a group chat, and it says, hi doctor, this is Tanisha, our mama who birthed 60 hours ago. We need you to have a peek at the baby. He's jaundiced and was so at 24 hours.
And was so at 24 hours.
Again, you guys, I'm not going to keep disclaiming this. In the moment, I didn't know none of this. But like, now that I know what I know, it's crazy that I called a nurse helpline and nobody there was like, oh, a jaundice baby within 24 hours, bring him in immediately. I'm talking to a midwife. You don't realize a jaundice baby within 24 hours needs to be brought in immediately. I'm connected with like, you're literally telling her that the baby was jaundiced at 24 hours. And guess what? The doctor didn't even say, oh, that baby needs to go in immediately. So I get on the phone with the doctor. We FaceTime. She didn't even ask to have like a peek at him, to like look at him. And again, this is crazy to me because these are like medical professionals, right? Like, now I know what I know. I could look at a baby and see, oh, it's like how yellow the baby is, whether it's in its face, its eyes, going down its body. Like, that's common science. So it's crazy that nobody knew this. But Anyways, I FaceTimed the doctor. I gave her a rundown of everything that happened. And literally by the end of the conversation, she told me, I agree with the midwife. I would wait it out till tomorrow and see how he does. So, little old me, regular postpartum, just thinking I'm under trusted care. I talked to my midwife and a doctor. I laid my baby down, waited out, see how he does tomorrow. And literally within like a couple of hours after laying him down, he was just screaming, crying, arching his back, just crying inconsolably. And like I immediately like knew something was wrong. Like if my mama gut wasn't already like talking to me when I decided to pick up the phone and call the nurse helpline, it definitely was like with that arch in the back and just crying inconsolably from a baby that just was so sleepy and quiet like the first couple days. That's when I decided to take him to the emergency room. And so yeah, again, I could do a whole part 2 of everything that transpired afterwards. Basically, she did end up admitting to being at fault. She actually admitted to it twice, one in person. She verbally had told me like I fucked up. I had no idea about the mechanisms of jaundice, which is crazy because she was also beforehand telling me like, oh, I talk to mamas about jaundice all the time, like blah, 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 like as if she did know. And then once I found out all of what I knew and where she fucked up and where she should have told me to take him in, I had expressed all of that to her. It's a whole story, y'all. Like, I don't even want to get into it. I'll have to do a part 2, but she did end up admitting to fault. But the crazy part is a lot of people ask me like if I seek legal action, and because I'm in California and midwives are not required to have liability insurance in California, a lot of the lawyers that I've contacted aren't willing to take the case because there's like no money in the case because it's not coming from an insurance company. And pretty much they don't see the benefit of doing all of the work just to like, I don't know. It's a lot, but I really just wanted to share those specific details of what happened leading up to him going to the emergency room, because a lot of people have questions about where exactly did the negligence occur. And as you can see, there's multiple holes in that story that are filled with negligence. So thank you for listening. I'm glad this is finally over because I procrastinated for so long. I'm definitely going to do a part 2 and kind of talk more about things that transpired afterwards and what our journey has been like since then. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them below. Any topics that you want me to talk more about, I'm an open book and I really do talk openly and passionately about all of this. This specific story about the specific negligence was like the hardest part for me to touch on, but now that that's out, I'm an open book and I would love to talk more about it all. So let me know what you would want to hear from me, and even from Papa Noble as well, because he wants to tell his perspective and side of things as well. So yeah, thank you guys for watching.